The dust kicked up by Marie Alvarez's worn boots settled slowly in the scorching Texas heat as she stood before the imposing gates of the Double R Ranch. Her black dress, still bearing the weight of recent grief, clung to her generous curves in the oppressive August sun. The letter crumpled in her sweaty palm bore the ranch's official seal and a job offer that represented her last hope for survival. Cook wanted, it read, for working ranch. Room and board provided. Experience required. She had lied about the experience. The iron gates stretched 12 feet high, crowned with the ranch's brand burned deep into weathered oak. Beyond them, a dusty road wound through scrubland toward distant buildings that shimmered like mirages in the heat. Marie's throat felt parched, her mouth dry as cotton, but she had no water left. The long journey from San Antonio had depleted her meager supplies, and the small inheritance from her late husband Thomas had dwindled to mere coins in her purse. A meadowlark's lonely call echoed across the vast emptiness, and Marie closed her eyes, drawing what strength she could from the sound. Thomas had loved birds. He would sit on their tiny porch in the evenings, pointing out different species and telling her their names in his gentle voice. That voice had been silenced 6 months ago by the fever that swept through their neighborhood like wildfire, taking him and leaving her with debts that consumed everything they had built together. The gate's heavy latch felt cold despite the blazing sun. Marie's fingers trembled as she worked it open, the metal protesting with a sharp squeal that seemed to announce her arrival to the entire ranch. She stepped through, her heart hammering against her ribs. There was no turning back now. The stage that had brought her this far was already disappearing in a cloud of dust on the horizon, carrying with it her last connection to the life she had known. The road beneath her feet was hard-packed earth, baked solid by months of relentless heat. Each step sent small puffs of dust swirling around her ankles, coating her already travel-stained skirts. The weight of her carpet bag, containing everything she owned in the world, made her shoulder ache. She shifted it to her other hand and pressed forward, her eyes fixed on the buildings that grew larger with each labored step. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. The ranch headquarters emerged from the heat haze like a settlement rising from the desert floor. The main house stood 2 stories tall, its wraparound porch offering blessed shade beneath a red tile roof. Outbuildings scattered around it like satellites, their purposes unclear to Marie's untrained eye. Corrals stretched in several directions, filled with horses that moved restlessly in the heat. The sound of their hooves and occasional whinnies carried on the still air, along with the distant lowing of cattle somewhere beyond her sight. But it was the figure standing on the main house's porch that made Marie's steps falter. Even at this distance, she could see he was watching her approach with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Tall and broad-shouldered, he stood with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to command. His hat was pulled low against the sun, casting shadows across features she could not yet make out clearly. Ryan Anderson had been watching the road since dawn. Word had reached him the night before that the stage would be bringing his new cook, and he had risen early to catch up on paperwork before the arrival. But as the morning wore on and the heat built to its punishing crescendo, he found himself drawn repeatedly to the windows, then finally to the porch itself. The woman walking toward his house was not what he had expected. Her correspondence had been brief and businesslike, revealing little beyond her name and her claim of cooking experience. He had pictured someone older, perhaps weathered by years of kitchen work, practical and unremarkable. The woman approaching through the dust was none of those things. She moved with a grace that spoke of inner strength despite her obvious exhaustion. Her figure was full and womanly, her bearing dignified even as she struggled with the weight of her bag and the oppressive heat. Something about the set of her shoulders, the determined lift of her chin, stirred something in Ryan's chest that he had thought long buried. He had been alone on this ranch for 3 years, ever since his father's death had left him sole owner of 20,000 acres and more responsibility than any man should bear alone. The previous cook, an elderly Mexican woman named Consuela, had returned to her family in Laredo after her grandson was born. That had been 2 months ago, and Ryan and his crew had been making do with their own poor attempts at cooking ever since. The hands were getting restless. Good ranch cooks were hard to find and harder to keep. The isolation wore on people, especially women. Most lasted a few months at best before the loneliness and harsh conditions drove them back to town. Ryan had learned not to expect much, but something about this woman's approach suggested she might be different. Marie could feel his eyes on her with each step. The sensation was unnerving and oddly thrilling at the same time. She had grown accustomed to being invisible in recent months, another widow in black among the many left by fever and accident. Men's eyes had stopped finding her long before Thomas died. Her fuller figure and matronly appearance rendering her unremarkable in a world that prized youth and delicate beauty. But this man was watching her with an attention that made her acutely aware of every movement, every breath. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin higher, drawing on reserves of pride she had thought exhausted. Whatever happened next, she would meet it with dignity. The porch steps seemed impossibly high as she approached. Her legs felt weak from the long walk and the heat, but she climbed them steadily, her eyes fixed on the man who waited at the top. Up close, he was even more imposing than she had imagined. His face was angular and weathered, marked by years of sun and wind. His eyes, a startling blue in his tanned face, studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Checkpoint. Ryan Anderson stood 6 feet 4 inches in his boots, his frame lean and powerful from years of ranch work. His dark hair showed threads of premature silver at the temples, and lines around his eyes spoke of long days squinting into the sun. At 32, he was considered a catch by every matchmaking mother in 3 counties, but he had shown no interest in settling down. The ranch consumed his time and energy, leaving little room for the complications that women inevitably brought. Until now. Looking at Marie Alvarez as she climbed his porch steps, Ryan felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates grinding against each other. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty that had nothing to do with youth or fashion. Her face was strong-boned and expressive, her dark eyes holding depths of experience that intrigued him. Her black hair was pulled back severely, but rebellious curls had escaped to frame her face with soft tendrils. And her figure. Lord help him, but she was a woman in every sense of the word. Her dress, though modest and appropriate for mourning, could not disguise the generous curves beneath. She moved with an unconscious sensuality that made his mouth go dry and his hands itched to touch. Marie reached the top of the steps and stood before him, her breathing slightly labored from the climb and the heat. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the strong column of his throat above his open collar. His presence was overwhelming, masculine in a way that made her feel distinctly feminine, despite her widow's weeds and travel-worn appearance. "Mr. Anderson," her voice came out steadier than she felt, with only the slightest tremor to betray her nervousness. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting orders across vast distances. "You would be Marie Alvarez." It was not a question, and something in his tone made her stomach flutter with an emotion she could not name. She nodded, clutching her carpet bag tighter. "I am. I've come about the cooking position." Ryan's eyes traveled over her face, taking in the fine bone structure, the full lips, the proud tilt of her chin. She was tired, he could see that. Tired and probably hungry and certainly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had undertaken. Something protective stirred in his chest, an urge to shelter and provide that he had never felt so strongly before. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. The words hit Marie like a physical blow. Her worst fears crystallized in an instant. He had taken one look at her and found her wanting. Too old, too plain, too obviously desperate. She had traveled all this way, spent her last coins on stage fare, only to be rejected before she could even prove herself capable. "I can cook," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I know my letter might not have conveyed much experience, but I've been keeping house since I was 14. I can prepare meals for large groups, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Ryan saw the flash of hurt in her eyes, quickly masked by pride and determination. He realized his words had been misinterpreted, and something about her defensive stance made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar emotion. "That's not what I meant," he said quietly. "I expected someone older. More settled." The pause before the last word was loaded with meaning that Marie could not quite decipher. She searched his face, looking for clues to his thoughts, and found herself lost in the intensity of his gaze. There was something there, something that made her pulse quicken and her skin warm in ways that had nothing to do with the oppressive heat. "I am settled," she said, though even as the words left her lips, she wondered if they were true. Standing here on this porch under the scrutiny of this man's penetrating stare, she felt anything but settled. She felt awakened, as if she had been sleepwalking through the last months of grief, and was only now beginning to truly see the world around her. "Are you?" Ryan's voice had dropped to little more than a murmur, and he took a step closer. Marie could smell the scent of leather and sage that clung to his clothes, could see the pulse beating steadily in his throat. "Because you look like a woman who's been running from something." The observation was too close to the truth for comfort. Marie had been running, fleeing the memories and the debts and the pitying looks of neighbors who whispered about poor Marie Alvarez, left with nothing but bills and an empty house. She had run to this remote place hoping to find peace, or at least the means to survive. She had not expected to find a man who could see through her carefully constructed composure with such unsettling accuracy. "I'm here to work," she said, her voice firming with resolve. "Nothing more." Ryan nodded slowly, though his eyes never left her face. "The job pays $30 a month, plus room and board. You'll have your own quarters behind the kitchen and Sundays off unless we have guests. The work is hard and the hours are long. We run a crew of 12 men most of the year, more during roundup and branding. They're good men, but they're hungry men, and they expect their meals on time and filling." $30 a month was more than Marie had dared hope for. It would allow her to save money, perhaps even send some back to pay down Thomas's remaining debts. The prospect of her own quarters, however modest, felt like luxury after months of uncertainty. "I can handle it," she said. "Can you?" Ryan's question was gentle but probing. "This isn't San Antonio, Mrs. Alvarez. We're 40 miles from the nearest town, and that's barely more than a trading post. The nearest real settlement is a day's hard ride. The wind never stops blowing. The sun never stops beating down, and the loneliness can drive a person to distraction. Most folks who come out here don't last long." Marie met his gaze steadily, drawing on every ounce of strength she possessed. "I have nowhere else to go." The simple honesty of her statement hit Ryan with unexpected force. He had heard desperation before, had seen it in the eyes of drifters and down-on-their-luck cowhands who showed up looking for work. But this was different. This was a woman who had lost everything and was making a stand with the last of her courage and pride. "Show me the kitchen," she said. "Checkpoint." Ryan led her through the main house, his boots echoing on polished wood floors. The interior was surprisingly refined for a ranch house, with sturdy furniture and colorful rugs that spoke of a woman's touch in years past. Marie noticed family photographs on the mantelpiece, a piano in the front room that showed signs of regular use, and books lining built-in shelves. "Your wife has lovely taste," Marie observed, running her fingers along the smooth surface of a dining table that could easily seat 12. "My mother," Ryan corrected. "She died when I was 20. My father never remarried, and neither have I." The information hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither acknowledged directly. Marie filed it away, along with her growing awareness of the man walking beside her. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own space, but she sensed a loneliness in him that matched her own. The kitchen was spacious and well-appointed, with a massive cast-iron stove, deep sinks, and more counter space than Marie had ever worked with. Windows on two sides let in natural light and offered views of the working areas of the ranch. She could see men moving between the corrals and outbuildings, their voices carrying faintly on the still air. "Consuela kept it well organized," Ryan said, opening cabinets to show her the supplies. "Most everything you'll need should be here. We get supply runs from town every 2 weeks, more often if needed." Marie nodded, already mentally cataloging the contents and planning possible meals. The pantry was well stocked with staples, and she could see a smokehouse through the window where meat could be preserved. A large garden plot behind the house showed signs of recent tending, with vegetables that would soon be ready for harvest. "The men eat breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, and supper at 6, Ryan continued. "They're not particular about fancy cooking, but they expect plenty of it, and they expect it to be good. Can you handle that? Yes, Marie said without hesitation. She had fed large groups before, helping her mother with church gatherings and community events. The scale might be different, but the principles were the same. Ryan studied her profile as she examined the kitchen, noting the way she unconsciously cataloged everything she saw. There was competence in her movements, a familiarity with kitchen spaces that suggested her claims of experience were not entirely fabricated. But more than that, there was something about her presence that transformed the room. It had felt empty and cold since Consuela's departure, but with Marie standing at the center of it, it suddenly felt alive again. There's something else, he said, his voice taking on a different quality that made Marie turn to face him fully. Something I need to tell you before you decide. The serious tone made Marie's stomach clench with apprehension. Was there some catch, some condition that would make the job impossible? She waited, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The men don't know you're coming, Ryan said. They know we hired a cook, but they don't know it's a woman, and they definitely don't know it's a woman who looks like you. Marie felt heat rise in her cheeks. What does that mean? It means that some of them haven't seen a woman in months. It means they're going to take one look at you and forget every manner their mothers ever taught them. It means you're going to have to be strong and clear about your boundaries from the very first day, or things could get complicated fast. The warning was delivered matter-of-factly, but Marie could hear the underlying concern in Ryan's voice. She appreciated his honesty, even as it added another layer of anxiety to her already precarious situation. I can handle myself, she said. I'm sure you can, but you won't be handling yourself alone. Any man who steps out of line with you will answer to me personally, and they all know it. Still, it's better if problems don't start in the first place. There was something in his tone, a possessive edge that made Marie's pulse quicken. She told herself it was simply the natural protectiveness of an employer for his staff, but the intensity in his eyes suggested something deeper. I understand, she said. Do you? Ryan stepped closer, and Marie could feel the heat radiating from his body. Because I'm not sure you understand what you've walked into here, Marie Alvarez. Her name on his lips sounded different somehow, more intimate than it had any right to be. Marie's breath caught as she looked up into his face, seeing something there that made her heart race and her knees feel weak. What have I walked into? She whispered. Before Ryan could answer, the sound of approaching horses broke the spell that had been weaving itself around them. Voices called out from the yard, and the everyday sounds of ranch life intruded on the charged atmosphere of the kitchen. The crew's coming in for dinner, Ryan said, stepping back and breaking the invisible connection that had been drawing them together. You might want to freshen up before you meet them. Marie nodded, suddenly aware of her travel-stained appearance and the way her hair had escaped its pins during the long walk from the gate. But as she moved toward the door that Ryan indicated led to her quarters, she could feel his eyes following her every step. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A single window looked out over the garden, and Marie could see that someone had made an effort to make the space welcoming. Fresh linens on the bed, a pitcher of water for washing, and wildflowers in a mason jar on the windowsill. She set her carpet bag on the bed and moved to the washstand, splashing cool water on her face and hands. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman she barely recognized. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with something that might have been excitement or fear or both. The careful composure she had maintained during months of widowhood had cracked, revealing glimpses of the passionate woman she had been before grief and responsibility had buried her so deeply. The sound of men's voices grew louder as they gathered for their midday meal. Marie could hear Ryan among them, his deeper voice carrying easily over the others. She quickly tidied her hair and smoothed her skirts, then took a deep breath and opened the door that connected her quarters to the kitchen. She would make this work. She had to make this work. There was nowhere else to go, no other options left to her. But as she began pulling ingredients from the pantry to prepare a simple meal for the crew, she could not shake the feeling that she had stepped into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple cooking job. The men filed into the dining room as she worked, their voices a low rumble of conversation punctuated by the scrape of chairs and the clink of dishes. She could feel their curiosity like a physical presence. knew they were wondering about the new cook they had yet to meet. Checkpoint. Marie's hands shook slightly as she sliced bread and arranged cold meat and cheese on platters. It was a simple meal, nothing that would truly test her cooking abilities, but it would have to suffice until she could plan something more substantial for supper. She could hear Ryan's voice explaining her arrival to the men, could catch fragments of conversation that made her cheeks burn. Name's Marie Alvarez. Widow from San Antonio, expects to be treated with respect. She took a steadying breath and lifted the first platter, pushing through the swinging door that separated the kitchen from the dining room. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and the conversation died abruptly. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as Marie set the platter on the long table. She could feel their stares like physical touches, taking in every detail of her appearance. Some faces showed simple curiosity, others barely concealed appreciation, and a few displayed the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Gentlemen," Ryan's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "This is Mrs. Alvarez, our new cook." A chorus of polite greetings followed, hats being removed and heads nodding respectfully. But Marie could see the speculation in their eyes, the way they glanced between her and Ryan as if trying to read some hidden message. She made several trips between kitchen and dining room, bringing out the rest of the simple meal while the men began to eat. Their manners were better than she had expected, their conversation gradually resuming as they grew accustomed to her presence. But she remained acutely aware of being watched, evaluated, discussed in glances and subtle gestures. When the meal was finished and the men had filed out to return to their work, Marie began clearing the dishes. Her hands were steadier now, her confidence growing with each completed task. She could do this. She could cook for these men, could carve out a place for herself in this harsh landscape. "That went well," Ryan's voice came from behind her, making her jump slightly. She had not heard him return to the dining room. "They seem like good men," Marie said, stacking plates with careful precision. "They are, but they're still men, and you're still a beautiful woman alone among them." The casual way he said beautiful made Marie's breath catch. She turned to face him, a plate clutched in her hands like a shield. "Mr. Anderson." "Ryan," he corrected, moving closer. "We don't stand on ceremony out here." "Ryan," she repeated, and the name felt strange on her tongue. Too familiar, too intimate for the careful distance she was trying to maintain. "I want you to know that I'm not looking for anything beyond employment. I'm not interested in complications." "What kind of complications?" His voice was soft, dangerous in its gentleness. Marie's mouth went dry. "The kind that happen when men and women work closely together. I've heard the stories about ranch life, about the loneliness and the way it affects people's judgment." Ryan nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "And you think my judgment is affected?" "I think," Marie said carefully, "that we barely know each other, and already there's something happening here that has nothing to do with cooking or employment." The honesty of her statement hung between them like a challenge. Ryan could deny it, could step back and pretend that the attraction crackling between them was all in her imagination. Instead, he moved closer, close enough that Marie could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "You're right," he said simply. "There is something happening here. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Marie's heart hammered against her ribs. This was exactly what she had feared, exactly what she had told herself she could not afford. She was vulnerable, dependent on his goodwill for her very survival. Getting involved with her employer would be disaster in any number of ways. But looking into his eyes, feeling the pull of attraction that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment, she found her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. "I don't know," she whispered. "I do," Ryan said, and his hand came up to cup her cheek with surprising gentleness. "I know that I took one look at you walking up that road and felt something I haven't felt in years. I know that watching you work in my kitchen feels more right than anything has in a long time. And I know that if you'll let me, I'd like to find out where this leads." Marie closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, despite every rational thought screaming at her to step away. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her cheekbone. When had anyone last touched her with such tenderness? "This is crazy," she breathed. "Maybe," Ryan agreed, "but crazy might be exactly what we both need." Before Marie could respond, before she could think of all the reasons why this was impossible, the sound of gunshots shattered the afternoon quiet. Ryan's hand dropped from her face as he spun toward the window, his body tensing with sudden alertness. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the door. But Marie could see the dust cloud rising on the horizon, could hear the thunder of approaching hooves and the shouts of men in distress. Whatever was coming toward the ranch, it was coming fast and it was coming with violence. Ryan's hand was on his gun as he stepped onto the porch, and Marie realized with sudden, crystalline clarity that her new life was about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. The riders cresting the hill were not friends. The riders cresting the hill were not friends. Marie could see that even from the kitchen window, could read the violence in their approach, from the way they sat their horses and the dust they kicked up in their haste. Ryan's hand was already on his gun as he stepped onto the porch, his body coiled with the tension of a man who had faced trouble before and recognized its approach. "Larry!" Ryan's voice carried across the yard with the authority of absolute command. "Get the men to the barn, now!" Larry Long, the ranch foreman, appeared from the direction of the corrals, his weathered face grim as he took in the approaching riders. He began shouting orders to the scattered crew, his voice sharp with urgency. Men dropped what they were doing and ran for cover, some heading for the barn as directed, others making for the bunkhouse where Marie knew they kept their weapons. Through the window, Marie counted at least 8 riders, maybe more obscured by the dust cloud. They rode hard and fast, their horses lathered with sweat and foam. Even at this distance, she could see the glint of metal in their hands, could hear their wild whoops and shouts carrying on the hot air. Ryan turned back toward the kitchen, his face set in hard lines. "Marie, get away from the windows. Go to your room and stay there until this is over." But Marie found herself frozen at the window, transfixed by the approaching danger. She had lived a sheltered life in San Antonio, protected first by her father and then by Thomas from the harsh realities of frontier violence. The closest she had come to real danger was the fever that had taken her husband, and that had been an enemy she could not see or fight. This was different. This was immediate and visible, and racing toward them with deadly intent. "Marie!" Ryan's voice cracked like a whip, breaking through her paralysis. "Move!" She stumbled backward from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. But instead of fleeing to her room as ordered, she found herself moving toward the dining room, toward the front of the house where she could better see what was happening. The riders were close enough now that she could make out individual faces, could see the wild expressions and unkempt appearance that marked them as something other than honest ranchers or travelers. Their clothes were dusty and torn, their hair long and unkempt, their faces bearing the hard lines of men who lived outside the law. "Rustlers," she heard Larry Long mutter to one of the other hands as they took positions behind whatever cover they could find. "Been hitting ranches all up and down the valley. Heard they got the Morrison place last week." Marie's blood ran cold. She had heard stories of rustlers, cattle thieves who struck fast and hard, taking what they could and leaving destruction in their wake. But the stories had always seemed distant, like tales from some other world that had nothing to do with her quiet existence. Now that world had found her. The lead rider pulled up just outside the main gate, his horse dancing and snorting beneath him. He was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a black beard that covered half his face. His eyes, visible even at this distance, held a wildness that made Marie's skin crawl. "Anderson!" he shouted, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "We know you're in there. Come out and let's talk like civilized men." Ryan stepped to the edge of the porch, his rifle now visible in his hands. "You're on private property, Ethan James. State your business or move on." Ethan James. Marie had heard that name whispered in fearful tones during her journey west. He was the leader of a gang that had been terrorizing ranchers across 3 counties, stealing cattle and horses, burning buildings, and leaving a trail of violence in their wake. The law had been hunting him for months, but he seemed to vanish into the vast wilderness like smoke whenever they got close. "My business is simple," James called back, his voice carrying a mocking tone. "We're running low on supplies, and your ranch looks mighty prosperous. Thought you might be willing to share. Nothing here for you, Ryan replied, his voice steady despite the odds against them. Keep riding. James laughed, a sound devoid of humor that made Marie shiver despite the oppressive heat. Now that's not very neighborly, Anderson, especially when we've come such a long way to visit. He gestured to his men, and they began to spread out, surrounding the ranch buildings with practiced efficiency. Marie could see the calculation in their movements, the way they positioned themselves to cut off escape routes and provide covering fire for each other. These were not desperate men acting on impulse. They were experienced predators who had done this many times before. Besides, James continued, his voice taking on a different quality that made Marie's stomach clench with dread. We heard you got yourself a new cook, pretty little widow woman from San Antonio. Thought we might introduce ourselves. The words hit Marie like a physical blow. They knew about her. Somehow word of her arrival had reached them, and they had come not just for cattle or supplies, but for something far more precious and vulnerable. Ryan's knuckles went white on his rifle. You're not getting within 100 yards of her. That's so. James's voice was filled with amusement. Mighty protective of the hired help, aren't you? Makes a man wonder what kind of cooking she's been doing. The crude implication in his words made Marie's cheeks burn with shame and anger. She had been at the ranch for less than a day, had done nothing but prepare a simple meal, and already she was being reduced to the subject of lewd speculation by men who saw her as nothing more than prey. Last warning, Ryan said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet that somehow carried more menace than any shout. Ride away now, or we'll bury you where you fall. James's laughter echoed across the yard again. Big words from a man who's outnumbered 2-1. But I'll tell you what, Anderson, send the woman out, and we'll take just what we need and be on our way. No harm to your men, no damage to your property. Seems like a fair trade to me. Go to hell. The words were spoken quietly, but they carried across the distance with perfect clarity. James's expression darkened, the mocking humor vanishing from his face like smoke. Have it your way then, he said, and Marie could hear the promise of violence in his voice. Boys, let's show Mr. Anderson what happens when folks don't want to be neighborly. Checkpoint 4. The first gunshot shattered the afternoon quiet like breaking glass. Marie threw herself to the floor as bullets began flying, the sharp crack of rifles and the deeper boom of pistols creating a deadly symphony that seemed to come from all directions at once. From her position on the dining room floor, she could see Ryan crouched behind a porch pillar, his rifle speaking in measured intervals as he picked his targets with careful precision. His face was calm, almost serene, as if this deadly dance was something he had performed many times before. The ranch hands had taken positions throughout the compound, their own weapons adding to the chaos of sound and smoke. Marie could see Larry Long behind the water trough, his ancient Spencer rifle bucking against his shoulder with each shot. Near the barn, she spotted Justin Gomez and 2 other hands she had not yet learned to identify, their faces grim with concentration as they returned fire. But they were badly outnumbered, and the rustlers had the advantage of mobility. They rode in wide circles around the ranch buildings, using their horses' speed to make themselves difficult targets while keeping up a steady stream of fire that forced the defenders to keep their heads down. A bullet shattered the dining room window above Marie's head, showering her with glass fragments that glittered like deadly snow in the afternoon sunlight. She pressed herself flatter against the floor, her hands covering her head as more shots peppered the front of the house. Through the chaos, she could hear James shouting orders to his men, coordinating their attack with the efficiency of a military commander. They were not random bandits acting on impulse. They were organized, experienced, and utterly ruthless. Flank them from the south, James's voice carried over the gunfire. Jose, take 3 men and circle around behind the barn. Cut off their retreat. Jose Cooper, apparently James's lieutenant, spurred his horse toward the indicated position, 3 other riders following in his wake. Marie watched in horror as they disappeared behind the outbuildings, realizing that they were being systematically surrounded. A lull in the firing allowed her to hear Ryan's voice calling out to his men. Save your ammunition! Make every shot count! They're trying to wear us down! But even as he spoke, Marie could see the futility of their situation. The ranch hands were brave and determined, but they were cattlemen, not gunfighters. Several were already wounded, She could see blood on their clothes and the way they favored certain limbs as they moved. The rustlers, by contrast, seemed to be enjoying themselves. Their wild whoops and laughter punctuated the gunfire, and Marie realized with growing horror that this was sport to them. They were not just stealing cattle or supplies. They were playing with their victims like cats with mice. Another window exploded inward, this one in the kitchen. Marie could hear the crash of dishes and the tinkle of falling glass. Her sanctuary, the place where she had hoped to build a new life, was being systematically destroyed around her. A new sound joined the chaos, the crackle of flames. Through the broken window, Marie could see smoke rising from the direction of the barn. The rustlers had set it on fire, adding arson to their list of crimes. "The barn's burning!" Larry Long's voice carried across the compound, tight with desperation. "We're losing our cover." Marie knew that the barn contained not just hay and equipment, but also the winter feed for the cattle. Its loss would be devastating to the ranch's ability to survive the coming months. But more immediately, it meant that the defenders were running out of places to hide. Ryan's voice cut through the chaos again, calm and authoritative despite the desperate nature of their situation. "Fall back to the house, all of you! Get to the house!" Marie watched as the ranch hands began a fighting retreat, covering each other as they moved from their scattered positions toward the main building. But the movement exposed them to enemy fire, and she saw one man stumble and fall, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. It was Justin Gomez, she realized with a shock of recognition. The young cowhand who had tipped his hat so politely to her during the noon meal was now lying in the dust, his face pale with pain and shock. Without thinking, Marie found herself rising from the floor and moving toward the front door. She had to help him. She could not simply lie there and watch a good man bleed to death in the dirt. "Marie, no!" Ryan's voice cracked like a whip as he saw her movement. "Stay down." But she was already through the door and onto the porch, her widow's black dress making her a stark target against the white-painted wood. Bullets whined past her head as she ran toward the fallen cowhand, her heart hammering with terror and determination in equal measure. She reached Justin just as Larry Long arrived from the other direction, the older man's face grim with worry. Together, they grabbed the wounded man under his arms and began dragging him toward the house, bullets kicking up dust around their feet. "Stupid woman!" Larry gasped as they struggled with Justin's weight. "You're going to get us all killed." But Marie could see something else in his eyes beneath the anger. Respect. She had proven herself willing to risk her life for one of their own, and that meant something in this harsh land where loyalty was measured in blood and sacrifice. They made it to the porch just as another volley of shots peppered the front of the house. Ryan helped them drag Justin inside, his face dark with fury and something that might have been admiration. "That was the most foolish, brave thing I've ever seen," he said, his hands gentle as he examined Justin's wound. "Don't ever do it again." Marie knelt beside the wounded man, tearing strips from her petticoat to use as bandages. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels. Painful, but not fatal if they could stop the bleeding. "I couldn't just watch," she said, her hands steady despite the chaos around them. "He's just a boy." Justin managed a weak smile. 23 ain't so young, ma'am, but I appreciate the sentiment." The brief moment of human connection was shattered by another explosion of gunfire. The rustlers had regrouped and were pressing their attack with renewed vigor. Marie could hear their boots on the porch now, could see shadows moving past the broken windows. "They're coming in!" Larry shouted, raising his rifle toward the front door. Ryan moved to the window, his own weapon ready. "How many rounds do we have left?" The answer came in the form of scattered replies from around the room. Not many. They were running low on ammunition, running low on options, and running out of time. James's voice boomed from just outside the front door, so close that Marie could hear the cruel satisfaction in every word. "Last chance, Anderson. Send out the woman, and we'll make this quick and clean for the rest of you." Checkpoint. Avon. The silence that followed James's ultimatum was deafening. Marie could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every gaze in the room settling on her like a physical burden. She was the reason they were all going to die. Her presence had drawn these wolves to their door, had turned what might have been a simple cattle raid into something far more deadly and personal. Ryan's voice, when it came, was steady as granite. The only thing you're getting from this house is a bullet. But Marie could see the calculation in his eyes, could read the desperate mathematics of their situation in the tight lines around his mouth. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of ammunition. The barn was burning, their cover was compromised, and the rustlers showed no signs of backing down. She rose slowly from where she knelt beside Justin, her decision crystallizing with each breath. There was only one way to end this that did not involve the death of every good man in the room. "No," she said quietly. Ryan turned toward her, his eyes widening as he read her intention in her face. "Marie, don't even think about it." "They want me," she said, moving toward the door with steps that felt like walking through deep water. "If I go to them, maybe they'll leave the rest of you alone." "Like hell they will." Larry Long's voice was rough with emotion. "Soon as they get what they want from you, they'll come back and finish us off anyway. Can't leave witnesses." Marie knew he was right. She had seen the wildness in James's eyes, had heard the cruelty in his laughter. These were not men who honored bargains or showed mercy, but perhaps she could buy the others enough time to escape, to find help, to survive. "At least it gives you a chance," she said. Ryan crossed the room in 3 quick strides, his hands closing on her shoulders with desperate strength. "I won't let you do this. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for us." The intensity in his eyes took her breath away. This was not the concern of an employer for an employee, or even the protective instincts of a good man toward a woman in danger. This was something deeper, more primal. Something that spoke of feelings that had no business existing between two people who had known each other for less than a day. "Ryan," she whispered, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palms, could see the raw emotion he was struggling to contain. "I have to." "No," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I just found you. I'm not losing you now." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither had the time to explore. But Marie could see the truth in his eyes, could feel it in the tremor of his hands on her shoulders. Whatever was happening between them, it was real and powerful and utterly impossible given their circumstances. "Anderson!" James's voice boomed from outside, impatient now and edged with violence. "Time's up. What's it going to be?" Ryan's grip on her shoulders tightened, and for a moment Marie thought he might physically restrain her. But then his hands dropped to his sides and she saw something die in his eyes. "There has to be another way," he said. But even as he spoke, they could all hear the sounds of the rustlers positioning themselves around the house. Footsteps on the porch, the scrape of boots on wood, the metallic click of weapons being readied. They were preparing for a final assault, one that would end with everyone in the house dead. Marie reached for the door handle, her hands steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. But before she could turn it, a new sound cut through the tension. The thunder of approaching hooves coming fast from the direction of the main road. Everyone in the room froze, straining to make sense of this new development. Through the broken windows, Marie could see dust rising on the horizon, could hear the distinctive sound of multiple horses being ridden hard. "Riders coming in!" one of the rustlers shouted from outside. "Boss, we got company!" James cursed violently, his voice carrying clearly through the walls. "How many?" "Can't tell yet. Maybe a dozen, maybe more." Hope flared in Marie's chest like a struck match. Help was coming. Someone had seen the smoke, had heard the gunfire, had come to investigate. But even as relief flooded through her, she realized that the arrival of potential rescuers might make their situation even more dangerous. "Could be the law," Larry muttered, moving to peer through a crack in the shutters. "Sheriff's been hunting James for months." But Ryan's expression was grim. Or it could be more of James's men. Either way, we're about to find out. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and Marie could see the tension in the rustlers' movements as they tried to identify the newcomers. Some remained focused on the house, but others turned their weapons toward the approaching riders, clearly unsure whether they represented threat or reinforcement. James's voice cut through the confusion, sharp with command. "Hold your positions. Don't fire until I give the word." The riders crested the hill at full gallop, and Marie felt her heart sink as she got her first clear look at them. These were not lawmen or neighboring ranchers coming to help. These were more rustlers, their appearance and bearing marking them as cut from the same cloth as James's original band. But something was wrong. Instead of joining their Confederates, the newcomers were riding directly toward them, their weapons drawn and their intentions clearly hostile. "What the hell?" James's confusion was evident in his voice. "Jose, what are you doing?" The lead rider, whom Marie now recognized as Jose Cooper, pulled up just outside the main gate. His face was twisted with rage, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the compound. "You lying bastard, James. You told us this was going to be a simple cattle raid." "It is a simple raid," James shot back, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "What's gotten into you?" "What's gotten into me?" Jose's laugh was bitter and harsh. "I'll tell you what's gotten into me. That's Betty Clark's ranch we hit yesterday, and Betty Clark is my sister." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Marie could see the shock ripple through both groups of men, could feel the sudden shift in the dynamics of the situation. What had been a simple case of predators and prey had suddenly become something far more complex. "You didn't tell us we were hitting family," another of the newcomers called out, his voice thick with accusation. "You said it was just another rich rancher who wouldn't miss a few head of cattle." James's face had gone pale beneath his beard. "Jose, listen to me. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know Betty was your sister?" "Because I told you," Jose's voice cracked like a whip. "I told you about my family when we first rode together, but you were too drunk or too greedy to remember." Marie could see the situation spiraling out of control. The rustlers were turning on each other, old grievances and hidden loyalties suddenly exposed by this unexpected revelation. But instead of making their situation better, it might actually make it worse. Men with nothing to lose were dangerous enough. Men who felt betrayed by their own allies were something else entirely. Checkpoint 6. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, with three separate groups now facing each other in the dusty compound. James and his remaining loyal men held positions around the house. Jose Cooper and his faction had taken cover near the gate, and Ryan's defenders remained trapped inside the main building, caught between the two warring factions of rustlers. Marie pressed herself against the wall beside the broken window, trying to make sense of the rapidly changing situation. The arrival of Jose's group had shifted the balance of power, but not necessarily in their favor. If anything, the presence of two groups of armed criminals made their situation even more precarious. "Jose, be reasonable," James called out, his voice taking on a wheedling tone that made Marie's skin crawl. "So what if the woman was your sister? She's got more cattle than she knows what to do with. We took maybe 50 head. Nothing she'll miss." "Nothing she'll miss?" Jose's voice was incredulous. "Those were her breeding stock, you fool. Her prize bulls. Without them, she can't rebuild her herd after the drought." Marie felt a chill run down her spine. She was beginning to understand the scope of what these men had been doing. This was not random banditry, but a systematic campaign to destroy the livelihoods of honest ranchers. They were not just stealing cattle, they were destroying entire ways of life. "And what about the Morrison place?" Another of Jose's men called out. "You burned their house down with the old man still in it." "He was shooting at us," James protested. "What did you expect us to do?" "I expected us to take what we needed and leave." Jose's voice was raw with emotion. "Not turn into a pack of mad dogs." The argument continued, voices rising with anger and accusation, but Marie found herself focusing on Ryan's face. He was listening intently to every word, and she could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He was planning something, looking for an opportunity in the chaos. "What are you thinking?" she whispered, moving closer to him. "I'm thinking that when thieves fall out, honest men sometimes find opportunities," he replied quietly. "If we can get them fighting each other instead of us." But before he could finish the thought, the situation exploded into violence. One of James's men, apparently deciding that talk was useless, opened fire on Jose's group. The bullet took one of the newcomers in the chest, spinning him from his saddle to crash motionless in the dust. The compound erupted in gunfire as the two factions of rustlers began shooting at each other with the same viciousness they had previously directed at the ranch defenders. Bullets flew in all directions, ricocheting off buildings and sending up spurts of dust where they struck the ground. "Get down!" Ryan shouted, pulling Marie away from the window as a stray bullet shattered what remained of the glass. From their position on the floor, they could hear the battle raging outside. Men shouted and cursed, horses screamed and reared, and the constant crack of gunfire created a din that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. "Now's our chance," Larry Long said, his weathered face grim with determination. "While they're busy killing each other, we can make a break for it." "Where?" Ryan asked. "The barn's burning, and they've got us surrounded." "The root cellar behind the kitchen," Justin Gomez suggested, wincing as the movement aggravated his wounded shoulder. "We could hide there until they finish each other off." Marie shook her head. "That's not hiding. That's just postponing the inevitable. Whoever wins out there will still come looking for us." Through the chaos outside, she could hear James's voice bellowing orders to his men. Despite the surprise of Jose's betrayal, he was rallying his forces and beginning to gain the upper hand. His group had been larger to begin with, and they had better positions around the ranch buildings. "He's right," she said, her voice barely audible over the gunfire. "We need to do something while they're distracted." Ryan's eyes met hers, and she could see the same desperate calculation she felt reflected in his gaze. They were running out of time and options. Soon, one group or the other would emerge victorious from the battle outside, and then their attention would return to the people trapped in the house. A new sound cut through the chaos, the whinny of horses from the direction of the corrals. Marie realized with sudden clarity what was happening. In their focus on each other, both groups of rustlers had forgotten about the ranch's remuda, the herd of horses that represented a significant portion of Ryan's wealth. "The horses," she said urgently. "They're spooked by the gunfire. If they break out of the corral—" Ryan's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. "They'll scatter across half the county. It'll take weeks to round them up again, if we ever can." But Marie was thinking beyond the immediate loss of livestock. "Or," she said slowly, "we could use them." "Use them how?" "As a distraction. If we can get them running in the right direction, toward the rustlers." Ryan stared at her for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. It was not a pleasant expression, but one that spoke of desperate men willing to take desperate chances. "Larry," he said, his voice taking on the tone of command, "you and the boys keep up a steady fire from the windows. Make them think we're still pinned down here." "What are you planning?" the foreman asked. "Marie and I are going to circle around to the corrals. If we can spook those horses in the right direction—" "You're crazy," Larry said flatly. "You'll never make it across the yard without getting shot." "Maybe not," Ryan admitted, "but it's better than sitting here waiting to die." Marie felt her heart racing as she realized what he was proposing. They would have to leave the relative safety of the house, cross open ground while two groups of armed men were shooting at each other, and somehow reach the corrals without being killed. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was probably their only chance. "I'm going with you," she said. Ryan shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. This is dangerous enough without worrying about protecting you." "You're not protecting me," Marie said, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'm helping you. I know horses, Ryan. I grew up around them. You'll need someone who can handle them once we get there." It was not entirely true. She had some experience with horses, but nothing like what would be required for what they were contemplating. But she could see the desperate hope in Ryan's eyes, could feel the weight of responsibility he carried for everyone in the house. She would not let him face this alone. "Marie," he began. "We don't have time to argue," she interrupted. "Every minute we waste here is another minute for one of those groups to finish off the other and turn their attention back to us." Ryan stared at her for a long moment, and Marie could see the war between his protective instincts and his practical recognition of their situation playing out across his face. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Stay close to me," he said. "Do exactly what I say when I say it. And if something happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," Marie said with more confidence than she felt. "If something happens to me," Ryan continued as if she had not spoken, "you get back to the house and barricade yourself in the root cellar. Don't try to be a hero." Marie nodded, though they both knew that if Ryan fell, her chances of making it back to the house alive were virtually non-existent. Ryan moved to the back door of the house, the one that faced away from most of the fighting. Through the window, Marie could see the corrals in the distance, perhaps 200 yards away across open ground. The horses were indeed spooked, milling about nervously as the sounds of battle echoed around them. "Ready?" Ryan asked, his hand on the door handle. Marie took a deep breath, thinking of Thomas and the quiet life she had lost, of the desperate journey that had brought her to this place, of the impossible attraction she felt for the man beside her. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether she lived to see another sunrise. "Ready," she said. Ryan opened the door, and together they stepped out into the chaos of the Texas afternoon, where death waited in the dust and their only hope lay in the wild hearts of frightened horses. Checkpoint 7. The back door of the house opened onto a scene from hell. Smoke from the burning barn created a haze that stung Marie's eyes and made breathing difficult. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of burning hay and wood, creating an atmosphere that seemed to coat her lungs with each breath. Ryan moved with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger, keeping low as he led her away from the house toward the dubious cover of a tool shed. Marie followed as closely as she dared, her black dress hampering her movement, but her determination driving her forward. The gunfire was deafening now that they were outside. The sharp crack of rifles punctuated by the deeper boom of pistols and the occasional ricochet that sent sparks flying from metal surfaces. Through the smoke, Marie could see muzzle flashes from both groups of rustlers as they continued their deadly dance around the ranch buildings. They reached the tool shed without being spotted, pressing themselves against its weathered wood walls while Ryan surveyed the route to the corrals. The horses were clearly visible now, perhaps 30 head of prime stock milling nervously in their enclosure. Their eyes were white with fear, their nostrils flared as they caught the scent of smoke and blood on the wind. "See the big sorrel stallion?" Ryan whispered, pointing to a magnificent red horse that stood slightly apart from the others. "That's Thunder. He's the herd leader. If we can get him running, the others will follow." Marie nodded, though her mouth was too dry to speak. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. They would have to cross another 100 yards of open ground, somehow get into the corral without being trampled by panicked horses, and then direct the herd toward the rustlers. Assuming, of course, that they were not shot dead before they took 10 steps. A particularly intense exchange of gunfire erupted from the direction of the main gate, and Ryan seized the moment. "Now," he said, and they were running. Marie had never run so hard in her life. Her heavy skirts tangled around her legs, her corset constricted her breathing, and her heart hammered against her ribs with such force that she thought it might burst. But fear gave her strength, and desperation gave her speed. They covered the first 50 yards without being detected, using the smoke and the chaos to mask their movement. But as they approached the corrals, Marie heard a shout from behind them. "There! Behind the shed!" A bullet whined past her head, close enough that she could feel the displaced air. Another struck the ground at her feet, sending up a spray of dust and pebbles. Ryan grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the corral fence, both of them moving with the desperate energy of the hunted. They reached the wooden rails just as more shots rang out. Ryan vaulted over the fence with athletic grace, then turned to help Marie climb over. Her dress caught on the rough wood, tearing with a sound that seemed impossibly loud despite the chaos around them. And then they were inside the corral with 30 terrified horses. And Marie realized that they might have escaped the bullets only to be trampled to death by the very animals they hoped to use for salvation. The horses reared and plunged around them, their hooves striking the ground with enough force to crush bones. Marie pressed herself against the fence, trying to make herself as small as possible while Ryan moved toward the center of the enclosure. "Easy, Thunder," he called to the big stallion, his voice somehow carrying calm authority despite their desperate circumstances. "Easy, boy." The horse's ears pricked forward at the familiar voice, and for a moment the chaos in the corral seemed to lessen. Ryan moved closer, his hands extended, speaking in low tones that Marie could not make out over the continuing gunfire. But their respite was brief. More shouts came from the direction of the house as additional rustlers spotted them. Marie could see men running toward the corrals, their weapons raised and their intentions clear. "Ryan!" she called out, pointing toward the approaching danger. He looked up from the stallion, his face grim as he assessed their situation. They were trapped now, caught between the panicked horses and the approaching gunmen, with nowhere left to run. "Get ready to open the gate," he called to Marie, pointing toward the corral entrance. "What are you going to do?" Instead of answering, Ryan grabbed a handful of Thunder's mane and swung himself onto the stallion's back. The horse reared and plunged, but Ryan's years of experience showed as he maintained his seat despite having no saddle or bridle. "When I give the signal," he shouted over the noise, "open that gate and get out of the way." Marie ran toward the gate, her hands fumbling with the rope that held it closed. The knot was tight and her fingers were shaking, but desperation gave her strength. Behind her, she could hear Ryan's voice raised in a wild yell that seemed to come from some primal place deep in his chest. The sound galvanized the horses, Thunder surged forward, and the rest of the herd followed as if pulled by invisible strings. Marie got the gate open just as the stampede reached it, throwing herself aside as 30 horses thundered past her in a cloud of dust and flying hooves. The effect on the approaching rustlers was immediate and devastating. Men dove for cover as the herd bore down on them, their weapons forgotten in the face of this new and unexpected threat. Some tried to stand their ground and were knocked flying by the impact of horseflesh moving at full gallop. But it was the effect on the main battle that truly changed everything. The horses, driven by fear and led by Thunder with Ryan still clinging to his back, charged directly into the middle of the gunfight between James's men and Jose's faction. Chaos became pandemonium. Horses scattered men in all directions, overturning whatever cover they had found and sending weapons flying. The carefully organized battle dissolved into a confused melee as rustlers tried to avoid being trampled while still maintaining their fight with each other. Marie watched in amazement as Ryan guided Thunder through the chaos, using the stallion's bulk and speed to scatter enemies like bowling pins. Other horses followed, their panic-driven flight adding to the confusion and destruction. But even as she marveled at the effectiveness of their desperate gambit, Marie realized that Ryan was in terrible danger. Clinging to the back of a panicked horse in the middle of a gunfight, he was as likely to be shot by accident as by design. She had to do something to help him. Without thinking, Marie ran toward the house, her torn dress streaming behind her like a battle flag. She could see Larry Long and the other defenders at the windows, their faces showing amazement at the chaos unfolding in the yard. "Now," she screamed at them, "while they're scattered, fight back now." Her words seemed to break the spell that had held the ranch hands frozen. They poured out of the house with renewed determination, their weapons blazing as they pressed their advantage against the disorganized rustlers. The tide of battle had turned, but even as victory seemed within reach, Marie saw something that made her blood run cold. Ethan James, separated from his men and driven to desperate fury by the collapse of his carefully planned raid, had spotted Ryan on the stallion's back. The outlaw leader raised his rifle, his face twisted with rage as he took careful aim at the man who had orchestrated his defeat. And Marie realized with crystalline clarity that she was the only person in position to stop him. Marie saw Ethan James raise his rifle toward Ryan, and time seemed to slow to a crawl. The outlaw leader's face was twisted with murderous rage, his finger tightening on the trigger as he took careful aim at the man clinging to Thunder's back. In that crystalline moment of clarity, Marie realized that everything they had fought for, everything they had risked, would be lost if James succeeded in his shot. Without conscious thought, she was moving. Her torn black dress streamed behind her as she ran across the chaotic battlefield, her feet finding purchase on ground churned to mud by horse hooves and spilled blood. Men scattered around her, some fleeing the stampeding horses, others locked in desperate combat with their former allies. James's concentration was absolute. His world narrowed to the sight picture of his rifle and the target beyond. He did not see Marie approaching from his blind side, did not hear her footsteps over the din of battle. His finger began its final squeeze on the trigger just as Marie threw herself against him with all the force her generous frame could muster. The rifle discharged with a thunderous crack, but the bullet went wide, striking the ground where Thunder had been a heartbeat before. James staggered under Marie's impact, his weapon flying from his hands as they both crashed to the dust in a tangle of limbs and fury. "You interfering witch!" James snarled, his hand closing around Marie's throat with crushing force. His eyes held the wild gleam of a man who had lost everything and blamed the world for his failures. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't come here, none of this would have happened." Marie clawed at his hands, her vision beginning to darken as his grip tightened. She could feel the strength draining from her limbs, could hear her heartbeat thundering in her ears like distant drums. But even as consciousness began to slip away, she saw Ryan vault from Thunder's back and come running toward them with murder in his eyes. James saw him too, and his free hand scrabbled for the pistol at his hip. The cold metal of the barrel pressed against Marie's temple, and she felt the last of her hope drain away like water through sand. "Stay back, Anderson," James shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "One more step and I'll paint the ground with her brains." Ryan stopped as if he had struck a wall, his hands raised but his body coiled with barely contained violence. "Let her go, James. Your fight is with me, not her. My fight is with anyone who gets in my way." James's grip on Marie's throat loosened slightly, but the gun remained pressed against her head. "You think you're so high and mighty, don't you? Lord of your little kingdom, taking in strays and playing the hero?" Marie could see the calculation in Ryan's eyes, could read the desperate mathematics of their situation in the tension of his shoulders. He was looking for an opening, some chance to act without getting her killed in the process. "I'll make you a deal," James continued, his voice taking on the wheedling tone of a man trying to bargain his way out of inevitable defeat. "Give me a horse and safe passage off your land, and I'll let the woman live." "And if I refuse?" James pressed the gun harder against Marie's temple, and she could smell the metallic scent of gunpowder on the barrel. "Then you'll have her death on your conscience for the rest of your very short life." The standoff stretched between them like a taut wire, with Marie caught in the middle. Around them, the battle had largely ended, with most of James's men either dead, wounded, or fled. Jose Cooper and his faction had similarly melted away into the vast Texas landscape, leaving only the ranch defenders and this final, deadly confrontation. Marie could see Larry Long and the other hands positioning themselves around the scene, their weapons trained on James but unable to act for fear of hitting her. The weight of everyone's helplessness pressed down on her like a physical burden. But as she lay there in the dust with a gun to her head, Marie found herself thinking not of death, but of life, of Thomas and the quiet love they had shared, of the journey that had brought her to this remote place, of the impossible attraction she felt for the man standing 10 feet away, with anguish written across his features. She had come to this ranch as a broken woman, a widow with nothing left to lose, but somewhere in the space of a single day, she had found something worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the sudden stillness. "Don't talk," James hissed, his grip tightening again. "Don't you dare say another word." But Marie ignored him, her eyes locked on Ryan's face. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that I don't regret coming here. I don't regret any of it." She saw something break in Ryan's expression, saw the careful control he had maintained throughout the crisis finally crack. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. "Nothing's going to happen to you, I won't let it." "Touching," James sneered, "but you're not in a position to make promises, Anderson." "Now about that horse." His words were cut off by the sharp crack of a rifle shot. For a moment Marie thought he had pulled the trigger, thought her life had ended in fire and thunder. But it was James who jerked and stiffened, his eyes widening with shock and pain. The outlaw leader looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then up at the ridge overlooking the ranch where a lone figure stood silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Even at this distance, Marie could see the glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel, could make out the distinctive hat and posture of a lawman. "Sheriff," James whispered, and the words seemed to take the last of his strength. His grip on the pistol loosened, and the weapon tumbled from nerveless fingers to land in the dust beside Marie's head. Ryan was moving before the gun hit the ground, covering the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands were gentle as he pulled Marie away from James's collapsing form, his touch infinitely careful as he checked her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Marie shook her head, though her throat ached where James had gripped it, and her entire body trembled with reaction. "I'm all right." I think I'm all right. More riders were approaching now, their badges glinting in the afternoon sun. The sheriff and his posse had finally caught up with Ethan James, though they had arrived almost too late to matter. Sheriff Tom Bradley dismounted near where James lay dying in the dust, his weathered face grim with satisfaction. Been chasing that bastard for 6 months, he said, nudging the outlaw with his boot. Guess the chase is finally over. James's eyes found Marie's face one last time, and she saw something that might have been regret flicker in their depths before the light faded completely. Whatever demons had driven him to a life of violence and cruelty, they were silenced now. How did you know to come here? Ryan asked, helping Marie to her feet with hands that shook slightly. Smoke, the sheriff replied, gesturing toward the still-burning barn. Could see it from 10 miles away. Figured it meant trouble. Checkpoint 11. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of controlled chaos. Sheriff Bradley and his men worked methodically to identify the dead and wounded, separating James's gang members from Jose Cooper's faction and the ranch defenders. Several of the rustlers had survived and would face trial, while others had fled into the wilderness and might never be seen again. Marie found herself pressed into service as a makeshift nurse, her experience tending to Thomas during his final illness, serving her well as she helped treat the wounded. Justin Gomez's shoulder wound was painful, but not serious, and 2 other ranch hands had suffered minor injuries that would heal with time and care. But it was the emotional wounds that concerned her most. She could see the weight of the day's events settling on everyone like a heavy blanket. The realization of how close they had all come to death, casting a shadow over their victory. Ryan moved through the scene like a man in a dream, directing the cleanup efforts and answering the sheriff's questions with mechanical precision. But Marie could see the strain in the set of his shoulders, could read the exhaustion in his eyes. He was holding himself together through sheer force of will, but she wondered how long that control would last. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the immediate crisis finally began to wind down. The sheriff and his men prepared to depart with their prisoners, and the ranch hands began the long process of assessing the damage and planning repairs. Marie stood in the ruins of the kitchen, surveying the destruction with a heavy heart. Windows were shattered, dishes were broken, and bullet holes peppered the walls like deadly freckles. The room where she had hoped to build a new life looked like a battlefield, and she wondered if it could ever feel like home again. It can be fixed, Ryan's voice came from behind her, soft and reassuring. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands and his dark hair disheveled from the day's ordeal. The formal distance he had maintained during the sheriff's investigation was gone, replaced by something more intimate and immediate. Can it? She asked, and they both knew she was talking about more than just broken windows and scattered dishes. Ryan stepped into the room, his boots crunching on broken glass. The damage looks worse than it is. Most of the structure is sound, and what's broken can be replaced. He moved closer, and Marie could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. But there was something else there too, something that made her pulse quicken despite the trauma of the day. I thought I was going to lose you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. When I saw James with that gun to your head, I thought, but you didn't lose me, Marie said, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I'm here. We're both here. Ryan's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs tracing the bruises on her throat with infinite gentleness. You could have been killed. You should have stayed in the house where it was safe. Safe? Marie laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. There was no safe place today, Ryan. Not for any of us. You saved my life out there, he said, his eyes intense with emotion. When you tackled James, when you threw yourself between me and that rifle. I couldn't let him hurt you, Marie said simply. I couldn't stand by and watch. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither had the courage to voice directly. But Marie could see the truth in Ryan's eyes, could feel it in the tremor of his hands against her skin. Marie, he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. And then he was kissing her, his mouth warm and desperate against hers. Marie melted into his embrace, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the day. It was not a gentle kiss, not the careful exploration of new lovers, but the fierce claiming of two people who had faced death together and emerged victorious. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Marie could taste dust and gunpowder on Ryan's lips, could smell the scent of smoke and leather that clung to his clothes. It should have been unpleasant, but instead it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "This is crazy," she whispered, echoing her words from earlier in the day. "Maybe," Ryan agreed, his forehead resting against hers, "but I don't care anymore. Life's too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending we don't feel what we feel." Marie closed her eyes, leaning into his strength. "I came here looking for work, nothing more. I never expected—" "Neither did I," Ryan said. "But sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never see coming." A throat cleared behind them, and they sprang apart to find Larry Long standing in the doorway. The foreman's weathered face showed no surprise at what he had witnessed, only a kind of grim satisfaction. "Sheriff's ready to head out," he announced. "Wants to know if you have any final statements for his report." Ryan nodded, his hand finding Marie's and holding it firmly. "Tell him we'll ride into town tomorrow to give our full testimony. Tonight, we need to tend to our own." Larry's eyes flicked between them, and Marie saw approval in his expression. "About time," he muttered, then turned and walked away. "About time for what?" Marie asked. Ryan's smile was the first genuine one she had seen from him all day. "Larry's been telling me for years that this ranch needs a woman's touch. Guess he thinks you're the woman to provide it." The implication in his words made Marie's heart race. "Ryan, we barely know each other. This morning was the first time we'd ever met. And yet you risked your life for me," he pointed out. "And I would have done the same for you, without a moment's hesitation. Sometimes knowing someone isn't about time, Marie. Sometimes it's about recognizing something in them that speaks to your soul." Marie felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from emotion or exhaustion she could not say. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, for whatever this is." "I'm not asking you to be ready," Ryan said gently. "I'm just asking you to stay, to give us a chance to see where this leads." Through the broken windows, Marie could see the men working to repair the damage from the day's battle. The barn would need to be rebuilt, the corrals repaired, the horses rounded up from wherever they had scattered. It would take weeks, maybe months, to restore everything to the way it had been. But maybe, she thought, that was not the point. Maybe the goal was not to restore what had been lost, but to build something new and better from the ashes. "I'll stay," she said, and the words felt like a vow. "For now, I'll stay." Ryan's smile could have lit up the darkest night. "That's all I can ask for." As if summoned by their words, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the yard. But these were not rustlers or lawmen, but neighbors. Marie could see at least a dozen riders approaching, their faces showing concern and determination in equal measure. "Word travels fast out here," Ryan observed, moving to the window to get a better look. "Looks like half the county's coming to help." Marie recognized the truth in his words. This was how people survived in this harsh land. By coming together in times of crisis, by offering help without being asked and accepting it without shame. It was a lesson she was still learning, but one she was beginning to understand. The lead rider was a woman, Marie realized with surprise. She sat her horse with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle, her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, and her clothes designed for work rather than fashion. Behind her rode men and women of all ages, their faces showing the weathered determination of people who had faced their own share of hardships. "That's Betty Clark," Ryan said, and Marie remembered the name from the confrontation between James and Jose Cooper. Jose's sister, she must have heard what happened. Betty dismounted in the yard and walked toward the house with purposeful strides. Her face was grim, but there was something else there too, something that spoke of gratitude and respect. "Ryan Anderson," she called out as he stepped onto the porch. "Heard you had some trouble with my brother and his friends?" "Jose wasn't the problem," Ryan replied carefully. "From what I could tell, he was trying to stop James, not help him." Betty nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Jose's got a good heart, but he's always been easily led. I'm grateful he found his conscience before it was too late." She looked around at the damage, taking in the burned barn, the scattered debris, the bullet holes that marked the walls like scars. Looks like you could use some help getting back on your feet. We'll manage, Ryan said, but there was gratitude in his voice. Course you will, Betty agreed, but managing alone and managing with help are two different things. We brought supplies, tools, and willing hands. Figure the least we can do is help clean up the mess my family helped make. Marie felt something warm and unexpected bloom in her chest. This was community, she realized. This was what it meant to belong somewhere, to be part of something larger than yourself. In San Antonio, she had been just another face in the crowd, another widow struggling to survive. Here, her actions had meaning. Her presence mattered. More neighbors were arriving now, their wagons loaded with lumber and supplies. Marie could see women among them, their faces showing the kind of practical determination that got things done without fuss or ceremony. They would help rebuild, she knew, but they would also expect her to do her part. The thought should have been intimidating, but instead it filled her with a sense of purpose she had not felt since Thomas's death. She had a place here, a role to play in this community. She was no longer just Marie Alvarez, desperate widow looking for work. She was Marie Alvarez, the woman who had helped save the Double R Ranch. Checkpoint 12. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as the neighbors pitched in to begin the cleanup and repair work. The women took charge of the house, sweeping up broken glass and assessing what could be salvaged from the kitchen. The men worked on the more structural damage, boarding up broken windows and beginning the process of planning a new barn. Marie found herself in the center of it all, directing the kitchen restoration with a competence that surprised even her. These were practical women who knew how to work, and they accepted her leadership without question or resentment. It was as if her actions during the battle had earned her a place in their community that went beyond mere employment. "You'll want to replace that stove," advised Nancy Patel, a sturdy woman whose husband ran cattle on the spread adjacent to Ryan's. "That bullet hole in the firebox is going to make it smoke something fierce. And these windows need proper glass, not just boards," added Julie Cox, whose weathered hands spoke of decades of ranch work. "Can't cook proper meals in the dark." Marie nodded, making mental notes of everything that needed to be done. The list was daunting, but not impossible. With help and time, the kitchen could be better than it was before. "There's something else we need to discuss," said Donna Stewart, the oldest of the women and clearly their unofficial leader. Her white hair was pulled back severely, but her eyes held warmth and wisdom. "About your position here." Marie felt her stomach clench with sudden anxiety. Had she overstepped somehow? Had her relationship with Ryan become the subject of gossip and disapproval? "What about it?" she asked carefully. Donna's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "Well, seems to me that a woman who's willing to throw herself in front of bullets for this ranch might be more than just a hired cook." The other women murmured agreement, and Marie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Course you do," Nancy said with a knowing look. "We all saw the way Ryan looked at you when we rode up, and the way you looked at him. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Marie glanced toward the window where she could see Ryan working with the men to clear debris from the barn site. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his face streaked with soot, but he moved with the easy confidence of a man in his element. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Most worthwhile things are," Donna observed. "But complicated doesn't mean impossible." "I've only been widowed 6 months," Marie said, voicing the concern that had been nagging at her. "People will talk." "People always talk," Julie said dismissively. "Question is whether you're going to let their talk keep you from living your life." "Besides," Nancy added, "from what I hear, your husband was a good man who loved you. You think he'd want you to spend the rest of your life alone, out of some misguided sense of loyalty to his memory?" The question hit Marie like a physical blow. Thomas had been a good man, gentle and kind and devoted to her happiness. Even in his final delirium, he had worried about what would become of her after he was gone. "Take care of yourself, Marie," he had whispered with his last coherent breath. "Don't waste your life mourning for me. Find happiness wherever you can." At the time, she had thought he was talking about practical matters, about finding work and shelter and the means to survive. But now she wondered if he had meant something deeper, something more profound. "He told me to find happiness," she said quietly. "Then maybe you should listen to him," Donna said gently. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Bradley, who had returned to collect some final evidence from the scene. His presence reminded everyone of the seriousness of what had transpired, of how close they had all come to tragedy. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said, approaching Marie with his hat in his hands, "I wanted to thank you for your statement earlier. Your testimony will be crucial in prosecuting the surviving members of James's gang." Marie nodded, though the thought of testifying in court made her stomach churn. "I'll do whatever is necessary." "There's something else," the sheriff continued. "There's a reward for information leading to James's capture. $500 posted by the Cattlemen's Association. By rights, it should go to you." $500. The sum was staggering, more money than Marie had ever seen at one time. It would be enough to pay off Thomas's remaining debts, enough to give her true independence and security. "I don't want it," she said without hesitation. The sheriff's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Ma'am?" "I didn't do what I did for money," Marie explained. "I did it to protect the people I care about. Keep the reward. Use it to help the families of the men who were killed." She could feel the approval of the women around her, could see the respect in their eyes. This was the right choice, she knew, even if it meant continued financial uncertainty. "That's very generous of you," the sheriff said, "but the money is rightfully yours." "Then I'll donate it," Marie said firmly, "to the church fund for widows and orphans. They need it more than I do." The sheriff nodded slowly, clearly impressed by her decision. "I'll see that it's done. You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Alvarez." After he left, the work continued with renewed energy. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. The temperature was beginning to drop from the punishing heat of the day, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers across the compound. Marie stepped outside to get some air, her body aching from the day's exertions. The battle seemed like something from another lifetime, though it had been only hours since she had tackled Ethan James in the dust. Everything had changed in the space of a single day, and she was still trying to process the magnitude of that transformation. Ryan found her there, standing in the gathering dusk and looking out over the vast expanse of his land. He moved quietly, but she sensed his presence before he spoke. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said softly. Marie turned to face him, seeing exhaustion and satisfaction warring in his expression. "Just thinking about how different everything is from this morning." "Different how?" She gestured toward the house, where the sounds of repair work continued despite the late hour. "This morning I was a desperate woman looking for work. Tonight I'm part of something, part of a community." "You were always part of it," Ryan said, moving closer. "From the moment you walked up that road, you belonged here. It just took a crisis to make everyone realize it." Marie felt tears threaten again, overwhelmed by the events of the day and the emotions they had stirred up. "I keep thinking about Thomas, about what he would think of all this." "What do you think he would think?" Marie considered the question seriously, trying to imagine her gentle husband's reaction to the day's violence and its aftermath. "I think he would be proud that I found the courage to fight for something important, and I think he would want me to be happy." "And are you?" Ryan asked quietly. "Happy?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond the events of a single day. Marie looked into his eyes, seeing hope and fear, and something deeper that made her heart race. "I think I could be," she said honestly, "given time." Ryan's smile was soft and understanding. "Time is something we have plenty of out here." A new sound interrupted their conversation, the distant lowing of cattle. Marie looked toward the sound and saw a line of riders approaching, driving a small herd before them. Even in the fading light, she could make out the distinctive figure of Jose Cooper at their head. "He's bringing back the cattle," Ryan said, surprise evident in his voice. Jose rode up to where they stood, his face showing exhaustion and something that might have been shame. Behind him, Marie counted perhaps 30 head of prime breeding stock, the same animals his gang had stolen from Betty Clark's ranch. "These belong to my sister," Jose said without preamble. "Figured it was time to return them." Ryan nodded slowly. "That's the right thing to do." "Yeah, well, seems like I forgot what the right thing was for a while there," Jose replied bitterly. "James had a way of making wrong seem right, if you know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean." Ryan said. Question is, what are you going to do now? Jose was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the cattle milling restlessly in the gathering darkness. Figured I'd head down to Mexico, maybe find some honest work. Can't stay here, not after what happened. Why not? Marie found herself asking. You chose the right side when it mattered. That has to count for something. Jose's eyes found hers and she saw surprise in their depths. You're the cook, the one James was after. I'm Marie Alvarez, she said simply, and you're the man who turned against his own gang to protect his sister. Lot of good it did, Jose said bitterly. Still cost good men their lives. But it prevented more deaths, Marie pointed out. Your choice to break with James probably saved lives, including ours. Ryan was nodding agreement. She's right, and if you're serious about finding honest work, I could use another hand. Lost two good men today, and there's always more work than hands to do it. Jose stared at him in amazement. You'd hire me? After everything that happened? I'd hire the man who chose to do right when it counted, Ryan corrected. The question is whether you're that man. Jose was quiet for a long time, clearly wrestling with emotions he could not easily express. Finally, he nodded curtly. I'll think about it. You do that, Ryan said. Offer stands. As Jose rode away to return the cattle to his sister, Marie felt another piece of her understanding click into place. This was how healing happened, not through grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements, but through small acts of forgiveness and the willingness to see the good in people despite their mistakes. Checkpoint 13. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no trace of the previous day's violence except for the physical damage that would take weeks to repair. Marie woke in her small room behind the kitchen, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, before memory came flooding back. She had slept better than she had in months, despite the trauma of the battle. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the sense of security that came from being surrounded by people who had proven they would fight for each other. Whatever the reason, she felt more rested than she had since Thomas's death. The sounds of activity outside her window told her that the work of rebuilding had already begun. She could hear hammers and saws, the voices of men calling out instructions, the creak of wagon wheels as supplies were moved into position. The community that had rallied to help yesterday was back today, ready to continue the work of restoration. Marie dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found several of the neighbor women already at work. They had brought supplies from their own homes, and the room was beginning to look functional again, despite the broken windows and bullet holes. Morning, dear, Donna Stewart greeted her with a warm smile. Hope you don't mind us getting started without you. Figured you could use the extra sleep after yesterday. Thank you, Marie said, genuinely touched by their consideration. What can I do to help? Well, these men are going to be hungry soon, Nancy Patel observed, gesturing toward the window where the sounds of construction continued. And we can't very well send them away without feeding them properly. Marie nodded, already mentally planning a meal that could be prepared despite their limited facilities. It would be simple fare, but hearty and filling, the kind of food that working men needed to fuel their labor. As she worked alongside the other women, Marie found herself thinking about the offer Ryan had made to Jose Cooper. It spoke to something fundamental about the man's character, his willingness to offer second chances and see the potential for good in people who had made mistakes. It also made her think about her own situation, about the second chance she had been given by coming to this place. 6 months ago, she had been a broken woman with nothing left to lose. Now she was part of a community, valued for her contributions and accepted for who she was. You're thinking awfully hard for someone who's supposed to be cooking, Julie Cox observed with amusement. Marie realized she had been standing motionless, a wooden spoon in her hand and a distant expression on her face. Sorry, just processing everything that's happened. Lot to process, Donna agreed, but sometimes the best way to deal with big changes is to focus on small tasks. Like feeding hungry men. The wisdom in her words resonated with Marie. She had spent too much of the past 6 months focused on the enormity of her loss, on the overwhelming nature of her circumstances. Perhaps it was time to focus on the immediate, on the things she could control and influence. The meal came together with surprising efficiency, thanks to the help of the experienced ranch women. By the time the men began filtering in from their work, the tables were laden with food that, while simple, was prepared with care and attention to detail. Ryan was among the last to enter, his clothes dusty from the morning's labor, but his face showing satisfaction with the progress being made. His eyes found Marie immediately, and the warmth in his gaze made her pulse quicken despite the presence of so many others. "Smells wonderful," he said, taking his place at the head of the table. "Credit goes to your neighbors," Marie replied, gesturing to the women who had helped her. "I couldn't have managed without them." "That's what neighbors are for," Betty Clark said, taking her own seat at the table. She had arrived early that morning with Jose, who had indeed returned her stolen cattle and was now working alongside the other men to repair the damage. The meal proceeded with the easy camaraderie of people who had shared hardship and emerged stronger for it. Marie found herself relaxing in ways she had not been able to do since Thomas's death, feeling truly part of the conversation rather than merely an observer. "Marie," Betty said during a lull in the discussion, "I wanted to thank you for what you said to Jose yesterday, about choosing the right side when it mattered." Marie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just said what I believed." "Maybe so, but it made a difference. He's been carrying a lot of guilt about what happened, about the choices he made. Your words helped him see that redemption is possible." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Marie said quietly, thinking of her own circumstances. "Some more than others," Ryan added, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "And some people make the most of the chances they're given." The conversation moved on to practical matters, discussions of repair schedules and supply needs. But Marie found herself thinking about Ryan's words. Was that what this was? A second chance at happiness? At love? The thought should have terrified her. But instead it filled her with a cautious hope that she had not dared to feel in months. After the meal, as the men returned to their work and the women began clearing the tables, Marie found herself alone with Ryan for the first time since the previous evening. He lingered in the kitchen while the others filed out, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "Walk with me," he said quietly, and it was not really a question. They stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, walking away from the bustle of construction toward the corrals where the recovered horses grazed peacefully. The normalcy of the scene was almost jarring after the violence of the previous day. "I've been thinking about what you said," Ryan began, his voice careful and measured. "About this being complicated." Marie's heart began to race, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. And I think you're right. It is complicated. You're still grieving your husband. You're in a vulnerable position, and we barely know each other despite what we've been through together." Each word felt like a small blow, confirming fears that Marie had been trying not to acknowledge. He was having second thoughts, realizing that the intensity of their shared crisis had created artificial feelings that would not survive in the cold light of day. "I understand," she said quietly, though understanding did nothing to ease the pain. "Do you?" Ryan stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression intense. "Because I'm not sure you do." Marie looked up at him, confused by the contradiction between his words and his tone. "The thing is," Ryan continued, "complicated doesn't mean impossible. It just means we need to be careful, to take our time, to make sure that what we're feeling is real and not just a reaction to shared danger." Hope began to bloom in Marie's chest, tentative but persistent. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'd like to court you properly, Marie Alvarez, with respect for your grief and your circumstances, with patience for the time you need to heal, but with the clear intention of building something lasting between us." The formal words, spoken with such sincerity, made Marie's eyes fill with tears. This was not the desperate passion of the previous day, but something deeper and more considered. Something that acknowledged the complexity of their situation while still holding out the promise of a future together. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "Take whatever time you need. I'll wait." Marie looked into his eyes, seeing patience and understanding and something that might have been love. This man who barely knew her was offering her the most precious gift imaginable: time to heal, space to grow, and the promise of companionship on the journey. "I don't need time to know that I care about you," she said honestly. What happened between us yesterday, what I felt when I thought you might die, that was real. But, but you're right about the complications, about my grief, about the circumstances that brought me here. I need time to sort through all of that, to make sure I'm choosing you for the right reasons. Ryan nodded, his expression showing relief and understanding in equal measure. That's all I can ask for. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the horses graze in the afternoon sun. The scene was peaceful, pastoral, a stark contrast to the violence and chaos of the previous day. It spoke of continuity, of life going on despite the interruptions of human conflict. There's something else we need to discuss, Ryan said eventually. Your position here. Marie felt her stomach clench with sudden anxiety. What about it? Well, it occurs to me that a woman who's willing to throw herself in front of bullets for this ranch might be overqualified for just cooking. The echo of Donna Stewart's words from the previous evening made Marie smile despite her nervousness. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that this ranch needs more than a cook. It needs someone to manage the household, to handle correspondence, to deal with suppliers and neighbors. It needs a partner, not just an employee. The implications of his words were staggering. He was offering her not just employment, but true partnership in the operation of the ranch. It was a level of responsibility and trust that went far beyond anything she had dared to hope for. Ryan, I don't know if I'm qualified for something like that. You organized the defense of this kitchen yesterday while bullets were flying around your head, he pointed out. You coordinated the women this morning to prepare a meal for 30 people with minimal resources. You've already proven you can handle responsibility under pressure. Marie felt a flush of pride at his words, but also a flutter of fear. This was a big step, a commitment that went beyond simple employment. If she accepted, she would be tying her future to this place, to this man, in ways that would be difficult to undo. What would people think, she asked, about a widow taking on such responsibility so soon after her husband's death? I think they'd see a woman making the most of her circumstances, Ryan replied, and I think they'd respect you for it, just like they respected you yesterday. Checkpoint 14. Marie considered his offer as they walked back toward the house, where the sounds of construction continued to echo across the compound. The idea of true partnership, of being valued for more than just her ability to cook and clean, was intoxicating, but it also represented a level of commitment that she was not sure she was ready to make. Can I think about it? She asked as they reached the porch. Of course, Ryan said. But don't think too long. This ranch needs leadership, and I'd rather it come from someone I trust than someone I have to hire sight unseen. The afternoon passed quickly as the work of rebuilding continued. Marie found herself naturally falling into the role Ryan had described, coordinating between the various groups of workers, managing supplies, and handling the dozens of small decisions that arose during any large project. It felt natural, she realized with some surprise. The organizational skills she had developed as Thomas's wife, managing their small household and helping with his business correspondence, translated well to the larger scale of ranch management. She had abilities she had never recognized, talents that had been hidden beneath the conventional expectations of widowhood. As evening approached and the neighbor families began preparing to return to their own homes, Betty Clark approached Marie with a serious expression. I wanted to talk to you before I left, the older woman said. About Jose. Marie nodded, guessing what was coming. You're worried about Ryan's offer to hire him. Wouldn't you be? He rode with James, participated in raids that hurt good people. Some folks are going to have a hard time accepting him, no matter what he did at the end. It was a fair concern, and Marie could understand Betty's protective instincts toward her brother. But she had seen something in Jose's eyes the previous evening, a genuine remorse that spoke of a man ready to change his ways. People can change, she said quietly. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show them who they really want to be. And sometimes people just tell you what you want to hear, Betty replied skeptically. True, Marie acknowledged, but sometimes you have to take a chance on someone. Give them the opportunity to prove they're better than their worst mistakes. Betty studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Ryan's lucky to have you. You've got wisdom that goes beyond your years. I've learned some hard lessons recently, Marie said, about loss, about survival, about the importance of community. Maybe that's given me some perspective. Maybe so, Betty agreed. And maybe Jose will prove worthy of the chance he's being given. I hope so, for all our sakes. As the last of the neighbors departed, Marie found herself alone with Ryan and the ranch hands in the gathering dusk. The house felt different somehow, more like a home and less like a temporary shelter. Perhaps it was the repairs that had been made, or perhaps it was the sense of community that had been forged in crisis. Long day, Ryan observed, settling into a chair on the porch with a satisfied sigh. Productive day, Marie corrected, taking her own seat nearby. Look how much got accomplished. Couldn't have done it without help, Ryan said, both from the neighbors and from you. Marie felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. It had been a long time since anyone had valued her contributions so highly, had seen her as essential rather than merely helpful. I've been thinking about your offer, she said quietly. Ryan's attention sharpened, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. And I think I'd like to accept. The partnership, I mean, not just the cooking position. The smile that spread across Ryan's face was brilliant in the fading light. Are you sure? As sure as I can be about anything right now, Marie replied honestly. I know it's a big step, and I know there will be challenges, but I think I'm ready for them. What changed your mind? Marie considered the question, thinking about the events of the past 2 days and the revelations they had brought. I realized that I've been thinking too small. Ever since Thomas died, I've been focused on just surviving, on finding some corner where I could hide and wait for life to pass me by. And now? Now I think maybe it's time to start living again. Really living, not just existing. Ryan reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring in the cooling evening air. I'm glad, he said simply. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The sounds of the ranch settling into evening routine were peaceful and familiar, a stark contrast to the violence of the previous day. There's something else we should discuss, Ryan said eventually. About us, I mean. About the courtship. Marie felt her pulse quicken, though she tried to keep her voice steady. What about it? Well, if you're going to be my partner in running this ranch, people are going to talk. They're going to assume things about our relationship that might not be true, at least not yet. It was a valid concern, and one that Marie had been trying not to think about. The frontier was more forgiving than polite society when it came to unconventional arrangements, but there were still proprieties to consider. What do you suggest? She asked. I suggest we let them talk, Ryan said with a slight smile. And I suggest we take things at whatever pace feels right to us, regardless of what anyone else thinks. The simple honesty of his approach appealed to Marie more than any elaborate courtship ritual could have. They were both adults, both survivors of loss and hardship, both capable of making their own decisions about their lives. That sounds reasonable, she said. Good, Ryan replied, because I have to admit, the idea of conventional courtship never much appealed to me anyway. Marie laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the still air. It felt good to laugh, she realized. It had been far too long since she had found genuine amusement in anything. What's funny? Ryan asked, though he was smiling too. Just thinking about how unconventional all of this is. 2 days ago, I was a desperate widow looking for work. Now I'm a ranch partner being courted by a man I barely know, but would apparently die for. Life has a way of surprising us, Ryan observed. The question is whether we're brave enough to embrace the surprises. Marie looked out over the vast expanse of his land, at the stars beginning to shine in the clear Texas sky, at the man beside her who had offered her not just employment, but partnership and possibly love. 6 months ago, such a future would have been unimaginable. Now it felt not just possible, but inevitable. I think I'm ready to be brave, she said quietly. Ryan's hand tightened on hers and she could hear the emotion in his voice when he spoke. Then we'll be brave together. The next morning brought new challenges and new opportunities. Jose Cooper arrived early, his face showing the nervous determination of a man trying to prove himself worthy of a second chance. Ryan put him to work immediately, pairing him with Larry Long to begin the construction of a new barn. Marie watched the interaction with interest, noting how Larry's initial skepticism gradually gave way to grudging respect, as Jose proved himself willing to work hard without complaint. It was a reminder that redemption was possible, but it had to be earned through actions rather than words. The day passed quickly as Marie settled into her new role as ranch partner. There were suppliers to contact, correspondence to handle, and decisions to make about everything from livestock purchases to repair schedules. It was challenging work, but she found herself energized by the responsibility rather than overwhelmed by it. By evening, she was tired but satisfied. The ranch was beginning to function normally again, the damage from the battle was being repaired, and the future looked brighter than it had in months. "How was your first day as a ranch partner?" Ryan asked as they sat down to supper. "Exhausting," Marie admitted, "but good. I feel like I'm actually contributing something meaningful." "You are," Ryan assured her. "Already I can see the difference your organizational skills are making." The compliment warmed her, but it was the look in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. There was admiration there, and respect, and something deeper that spoke of growing affection. "Ryan," she said quietly, "I want you to know that I don't take any of this lightly. The job, the partnership, the courtship, it all means something to me." "I know," he replied. "It means something to me too." Checkpoint. 15. 3 weeks later, Marie stood in the kitchen of the main house, surveying the results of the restoration with satisfaction. New windows let in the morning light, fresh paint covered the bullet holes, and modern appliances had replaced the damaged equipment. It was better than it had been before the attack, more functional and efficient. But the real changes went deeper than cosmetic improvements. The ranch was running more smoothly than it had in years, thanks to Marie's organizational skills and attention to detail. Correspondence was handled promptly, supplies were ordered efficiently, and the dozen small crises that arose daily on any working ranch were dealt with before they could become major problems. More importantly, Marie had found her place in the community. The neighbor women who had helped during the crisis had become genuine friends, and even the ranch hands had accepted her authority without question. She was no longer the desperate widow who had arrived seeking employment, but Marie Alvarez, partner in the Double R Ranch. Her relationship with Ryan had developed slowly but steadily. They worked together during the day with increasing harmony, their different skills complementing each other perfectly. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. He had not kissed her again since that desperate moment in the ruined kitchen, but the attraction between them continued to grow. Marie could see it in the way his eyes followed her movements, could feel it in the careful space he maintained between them, as if he were afraid that getting too close might break the spell of their careful courtship. She was grateful for his patience, for the time he was giving her to sort through her complicated emotions. But she was also beginning to realize that her grief for Thomas was evolving, becoming something that honored his memory without preventing her from embracing new possibilities. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention to the window. A single rider was coming up the road, moving at an easy pace that suggested business rather than emergency. As he drew closer, Marie recognized Sheriff Bradley, though his visit was unexpected. Ryan emerged from the barn to greet the lawman, and Marie could see them talking earnestly in the yard. After a few minutes, both men walked toward the house, their expressions serious but not alarmed. "Sheriff," Marie greeted as they entered the kitchen, "this is a surprise." "Mrs. Alvarez," Bradley replied, removing his hat. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I have some news that I thought you'd want to hear in person." Marie felt her stomach clench with sudden anxiety. "What kind of news?" "Good news mostly," the sheriff assured her. "The surviving members of James's gang have been tried and convicted. Most got long prison sentences, though a couple of the younger ones got lighter terms in exchange for testimony." Relief flooded through Marie. The legal proceedings had been hanging over her head for weeks, the prospect of testifying in court a source of constant worry. Now it was over, the criminals punished and the chapter closed. "That is good news," she said. "Thank you for letting me know." "There's more," Bradley continued. "The reward money you donated to the church fund? It's already been put to good use. Helped 3 families get back on their feet after losing their breadwinners to James's gang." Marie felt tears prick her eyes. The decision to give up the reward money had been easy at the time, but hearing about the concrete good it had accomplished made her glad all over again. "I'm happy to hear that," she said. "And there's one more thing," the sheriff added, his expression becoming more serious. "We found some papers among James's effects. Seems he'd been planning raids for months, keeping detailed records of potential targets." Ryan's attention sharpened. "What kind of records?" "Names, locations, assessments of livestock, and cash on hand. Your ranch was on the list, Mrs. Alvarez, but not for the reasons you might think." Marie felt confused. "What do you mean?" "According to his notes, James had been watching this place for weeks before you arrived. He was planning to hit it eventually, but your presence moved up his timeline. Seems he thought a woman alone would make the ranch more vulnerable." The revelation hit Marie like a physical blow. She had been blaming herself for bringing danger to the ranch, for making Ryan and his men targets through her presence. But the truth was that they had been targets already, and her arrival had simply accelerated an inevitable confrontation. "So it wasn't my fault," she said quietly. "Ma'am, it was never your fault," the sheriff said firmly. "James was a predator who would have struck regardless. If anything, your presence probably saved lives by forcing the confrontation when the ranch was better prepared for it." Ryan was nodding agreement. "He's right, Marie. If James had attacked when we were expecting just a cattle raid instead of a kidnapping, we might not have been as ready for a fight." The weight that had been pressing on Marie's shoulders for weeks suddenly lifted. She had not brought disaster to this place, had not endangered the people she cared about through her mere presence. If anything, she had helped save them. "Thank you," she said to the sheriff, her voice thick with emotion. "For telling me that." "Figured you had a right to know," Bradley replied. "You've been through enough without carrying guilt that isn't yours to bear." After the sheriff left, Marie found herself alone with Ryan in the kitchen. The afternoon light streaming through the new windows seemed brighter somehow, as if the revelation had lifted a shadow she had not even realized was there. "How do you feel?" Ryan asked gently. "Free," Marie said without hesitation. "For the first time in months, I feel truly free." "Free from what?" Marie considered the question, thinking about all the burdens she had been carrying. "Free from guilt about Thomas's death, about the debts he left behind, about the danger I thought I'd brought here. Free from the feeling that I was just surviving instead of living." Ryan moved closer, and Marie could see something new in his eyes, something that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. "And what do you want to do with that freedom?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities that neither had dared to voice before. Marie looked into his face, seeing patience and desire, and something deeper that made her heart race. "I want to stop being afraid," she said honestly. "Afraid of caring too much, of risking too much, of hoping for too much." "And what do you want to hope for?" Marie's breath caught as she realized they were approaching a moment of truth, a decision that would shape the rest of both their lives. But instead of fear, she felt only certainty, a deep knowledge that this was right and good and worth whatever risks it might entail. "I want to hope for a future with you," she said simply. "Not just as partners in this ranch, but as partners in life." The smile that spread across Ryan's face was brilliant with joy and relief. "Marie," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. And then he was kissing her, his mouth warm and sure against hers. This was not the desperate kiss of two people facing death, but the tender claiming of two people choosing life together. Marie melted into his embrace, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past weeks. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Marie could taste the promise of forever on his lips, could feel the strength of his arms around her and the steady beat of his heart against her chest. "Marry me," Ryan said, the words spoken with quiet intensity that made them more powerful than any grand declaration. "Not because you need security or I need a housekeeper, but because we choose each other, because we're better together than apart." Marie felt tears of joy stream down her cheeks. This was what she had been afraid to hope for, what she had thought lost forever when Thomas died. Not just survival, but love. Not just existence, but partnership. Not just safety, but adventure. "Yes," she whispered, the word carrying all the hope and courage she possessed. Yes, I'll marry you. Ryan's kiss was her answer, fierce and tender, and full of promise. And as the Texas sun set over the land that was now truly home, Marie Alvarez knew that she had found not just a place to belong, but a person to belong with. The plus-sized widow who had applied to cook at the ranch had found something far more precious than employment. She had found love, partnership, and a future bright with possibility. And in the gathering darkness of the Texas evening, with the man she loved holding her close and the stars beginning to shine overhead, Marie knew that sometimes the best things in life were indeed the ones you never saw coming.